Hey, welcome back to part 2 of what I'm calling the Waponi-Woo UI tutorials, or the Waponi-Woo effects tutorials. Why Waponi-Woo? I think I'll let you guess, or Wikipedia it up. For those of you that are too young. Anyway, so what we looked at, we just sort of quickly went through an overview of the composition of the layers that made up this effect. Now we're going to dive right into the layer effects stack for each one of these layers. I use the term layer effects stack because that's exactly what it is. It's like a mini layering stack within each effects. From the top to the bottom, that's the order in which these things lay on top of each other. So, for example, a gradient lies on top of a pattern, and it will always be that way. At least in this version of Photoshop, you cannot change the order of things, so it's best to sort of come to grips and come to terms with that order and work within it, because otherwise you'll just be frustrated. Okay, so let's just take a look at step by step what makes up. We're going to start with the outer shape of this this progress bar. We're going to look at what makes that up, and I'm just gonna try to find the perfect zoom here. Okay, and so first thing that I knew I wanted to do, and I've got to say that I was kind of gratuitously copying off of something that I had seen, wanted to see if I could recreate it myself. I think that although I may not have improved in the look of it, I certainly have improved in the construction of it, because this can be entirely constructed using only 2 layers. That other than just being a sort of a personal feat, there's a real reason why you want to do that. When you're creating a user interface, be it for an application, for a website, or for whatever, you want it to be as portable and as versatile as possible. Keeping your entire UI constrained to just vector shapes and corresponding layer effects gives you that portability that no other approach will give you. If you have to create any kind of custom shapes, be it a custom mask, a new custom layer, a bitmap that you're going to overlay on top, anything at all, you're destroying the portability of that user interface effect or that style. You won't be able to necessarily use it on different sizes or shapes of buttons. This one here can be used on any button size, any shape, with minimal tweaking. So once you get your user interface skin looking exactly the way you want to, you can literally drag and drop it to any other vector shape layer on your in your Photoshop canvas, and it will immediately apply the exact same effect. So if you want a whole bunch of different types of buttons, radio buttons, pull down menus, text input fields, all styled with this orange crush Waponi-Woo interface, boom, it's just hold down your Alt key or your Option key on the Mac, drag the effects icon right here, or drag the word effects with the Option key or the Alt key held down, and drag it onto another layer, and that layer instantly inherits the entire look and feel. So there's some vast advantages to being able to contain your entire creativity to within the layer effects stack. They become completely portable. Okay, so when I wanted to create this effect, the first thing I wanted to make sure that we did was create a nice sort of metallic, embossed kind of element that would appear to be sunken in, so that we could contain the liquid in it. Would have a grill behind it, so it looked like the liquid was bubbling up through that grill, and of course had a glossy kind of 3-dimensional effect, like a glass tube or something over top of it. So we start with some of the obvious things. Bevel and emboss. This is going to be your go-to effect for creating 3-dimensional stuff. Now, you'll notice here that the bevel and emboss that I'm using here is highly exaggerated if what I wanted to do was simply create a little emboss coming out of the background. It's actually being used, more importantly, to create the highlight of the glass over top of the element. So because the bevel and emboss is the highest layer in the layer stack, or the highest effect in the layer stack, it gets a really high priority because it's the only one that can go over top of everything else. So rather than use it for what it's really supposed to be used, which is to create that 3D effect, I'm using it to actually create more of a highlight in the glass. The stroke, on the other hand, has been used as kind of the poor man's 3D effect. Neat thing about the stroke is that you can apply a gradient to it, as I've done here, and that's going to make this thing feel a little bit sunken in. By having the top left corner dark, the bottom right corner bright, and a gradient in between the two, you end up with something that will pass as a three-dimensional, an emboss effect when you can't use the bevel and emboss because you're using it for something more important. I'm going to jump down here to the pattern overlay, because otherwise we won't be able to see some of the other stuff like the inner shadow and the inner glow. The pattern overlay is a simple pattern that was created as a separate file and then brought in and is repeating. It's a seamlessly repeating pattern or seamlessly tiling pattern. So it can work on any size interface element. I'm never going to run out of pattern. This is way superior to trying to come up with a graphic that you would then clip to this layer. It's completely portable as a result. And that creates that grill background. There's a bit of a 3D effect if you look very closely at these elements. That's actually within the pattern itself. And so a little bit of tweaking in an external file to get that pattern looking right was necessary in order to make the effect work. Little gradient overlay never hurts, adds a bit of texture. It's a real classic kind of technique. Add a gradient overlay to almost any button shape and you're going to get a little bit more of either a rounded or a cusped or a three-dimensional kind of feel. Something a little more organic and realistic that adds variation, whether it's horizontally or vertically to the object, and just attracts certain portions to the eye. The inner glow is being used here to help emphasize the glass effect. So let's put the bevel and emboss back on. So in combination with the bevel and emboss, I'm using inner glow here not to sort of make it look like it's glowing on the inside, but to actually simulate what happens in real glass when light kind of bends into it. And to sort of get inspired for that, I actually looked up an image of what I thought would be kind of beakers or glass with liquid in it. It was originally blue. Just for the sake of helping me out, I colored it orange. This is just a thumbnail that I got from Dreams Time. Obviously not using it commercially, and we'll be discarding the thumbnail. It was just used as a reference image, and I'm pasting it here for you to see what I was working off of. But if you look at the edges of your glass, of the glass items, especially, I was kind of inspired by this tall beaker here. There's always a bit of a highlight in there, as well as a dark shadow. And so I thought, to get the glass effect looking right, I'd try to match that up. Okay, and then we've got the inner shadow becomes important. You'll turn it off and on a few times. That adds another layer of 3D embossing. Because the bevel and emboss was already used up, I had to sort of be a little more clever about how I could create a bit of a ridge or a bit of an edge for the progress bar outer element, make it just feel a little bit more integrated into its background, whatever that background happens to be. In this case, just a black background. So that's done using inner shadow. Very interestingly, it's not used to create a shadow at all. It's used to create almost like a little ring that then overlays on top of the inner glow. Notice the inner shadow is above inner glow. So I've got the inner glow, which is white, and then I'm using the inner shadow to provide a bit of a ring there. And then you get that in combination with the stroke, you get a kind of a emboss with an in and out kind of feel that creates exactly the ridge I was looking for. Over here now, I'm using outer glow for for the for a little. It's maybe hard to see. It's just a little bit of a darker, almost like a stroke. The stroke was already being used. I wanted to be able to contrast this off the background and make it feel sunken in. This has got no gradient on it whatsoever. It's just a real linear kind of approach. Just to create almost like a stamped, a machined kind of element, UI element that all of the other elements will take. And of course, this won't work so well against a light background. It'll probably be a little too intense. But against a dark background, well, let's just find out. See how this looks with against a white background. So it's a little bit harsh on the white background. You can see that. Let's zoom out to the normal size. So we'd probably want to tone that down. If we didn't know what color background we were going to work against, we'd probably tone that down or turn it off. But certainly against a black background, it really does help. And then finally, the old drop shadow. Surprisingly, the drop shadow is being used to create a highlight over here, not a shadow at all. So I think that what I want you to get across from this initial high-level overview, we haven't gone into any of the details of the parameters yet, is that I'm not using these effects for what they're called. The bevel and emboss is not being used for a bevel and emboss. The inner shadow is not being used for inner shadow. The stroke is, well, it's a stroke, but it's actually being used for a bevel and emboss. The pattern overlay and the gradient overlay, they're being used for what they're called, but they're not that descriptive, right? So the bottom line is Photoshop does us a bit of a disservice in naming these layer effects the way that they have, because it makes you think that that's the only thing that they can do. And to truly master the layer effects, what you got to do is put aside the name, what it's called. Use that maybe as a bit of a memory trigger. Oh yeah, that's right, that's the one that has the offset and so on and so forth. But really understand what each of the parameters inside the layer effects is for. And then you'll be able to more properly put together the effects in a stack that's unique and creative and gets around the certain limitations that are baked into to the layer effects, because each one, it can only do certain things, but it can do more than you probably think. So in the next part of the tutorial, I'm going to use one layer effects as kind of a case study, just to sort of hammer in this notion that you have to divorce yourself from what it's called in order to better understand what you can completely do with it. And then we'll come back and analyze each one of these, the parameters of these layer effects, to understand how this particular look and feel was built. So I'll catch you guys after the break.